Welcome to the Directing Animation Livecast with Scott Weiser, who has gone from a studio of one to directing at Spacestation Animation to supervising at Steamroller Animation, continuously developing over 15 feature film pitches on a quest to master the art of making deeply meaningful animated films. Today we are here with Sam Neelsen. Sam is an artist that I have admired since the beginning of my journey into animation, and he has experience in all kinds of companies such as Blizzard, Sony, Disney, and the list goes on and on. He's worked in video games, he's worked for other properties as well, and he is also a teacher at, if you're in an animation, you probably know what BYU's animation program is like. They've won all kinds of student Emmys and great awards, and they put a lot of great talent into the industry, and he's a teacher there as well. And I've noticed, Sam, that a lot of those students kind of develop an art style that is reminiscent of yours.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I haven't noticed that. I usually try and push students to scatter a little bit stylistically, but
Yeah.
I guess you can't help but have a little bit of a fingerprint on the stuff you do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you have, I've watched several of the students, and the style evolves also on your career. You know, you come out of school with one drawing style and you try others and you adapt to different projects and that sort of thing. So I think in some ways it's actually worked in their favor, you know, to have that level of drawing experience, but also be encouraged to branch out and all of that. So is there anything else you'd like to add to your bio too?
Yeah, I think my experience, like you said, has ranged quite a bit. And so I've had, I think this is significant for this discussion, that I've worked in film, I've worked in TV, I've worked in advertising, and I've worked in games. And it's interesting that I think some of the things and thoughts that I've got on art directors and creative directors and directors have come from seeing similarities across the different portions of the industry.
Yeah. That's awesome. So what inspired this conversation in particular is you came up with this LinkedIn post that was fantastic about 3 different kinds of directors that you often are working with, that sometimes people interpret their directing style as a weakness, when actually it's a strength if you know how to work with it. And yeah, I loved the discussion on there, read through it all today. But for our audience, will you remind us of what these 3 directing styles are?
Okay, so I'll talk about this in form of a few stories. So you may, hopefully, as you listen, feel a sense of familiarity to some of these things. So yeah. I was working with an art director a little while back, and everything that I did, they had a very specific draw over for. And after a while, I was just a little bit frustrated and just thinking like, well, why don't you just draw it? If you know how to draw it and you're just drawing it over and over, why didn't you just do it instead of hiring me to do it? And I felt some frustration with that. Another time I was working with a director who had a very open vision. At the beginning, it was pitched as just like, you know, we have all these possibilities and you just go explore and have fun. And then everything that I presented, it was just no, not that. It's not that. Nope, it's not that. And so I was just kind of felt like I was peeing off of all these different no's and trying to find some thing that I couldn't see. I didn't think that it didn't feel like the other director, where it seemed like they had a very, very clear, exact, specific vision, but that they knew what it wasn't, and that's what they were reacting to the whole time. Another time I was working in-house with a team, and we had a very exciting big project to do, and the art director kept giving us almost like inspirational seedlings. It was just like, what about this idea? This would be a really interesting thing to explore. And then everybody would go crazy with that. And then after a while, they would come in and they'd give us another inspirational seedling of an idea, and we'd go crazy with that. And of course, there was the occasional like, no, we're not going that direction. But for the most part, it seemed like the way that this art director directed was by kind of leading people along with these exciting visions. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting with that one is that I also found a lot of frustrations with that one, especially with the team, because I was the lead there, and the team wanted to know what they were making, and they never did know what we were making. They only knew what the possibilities of what we were making was. So those three stories kind of encapsulate those three director styles. So the first one being the vision holder. This is the director that knows exactly what they want, and you're just there to be their hands, or at least that's what it seems like. There's the now I can't remember the name that I used for it because these are just things I made up. But
the Explorer, I think.
Yeah, I think the Inspirer is
or the Eliminator.
One, for example. Yes, the options eliminator is the second type. So the options eliminator, they start out with a really broad vision, and then it closes. I don't know why those balloons happen.
Yeah, I can trigger them too.
Oh, is that what it happens?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll try to not make that gesture then.
Yeah, this one's great too.
Oh yeah.
I actually trolled my entire company for a while because I'd be in meetings and I would do that and they'd be like, I can't do that. I need to upgrade my Zoom. But it's actually a Mac feature.
I had a meeting where the balloons were just coming up all the time, but I wasn't doing anything with my hands. But everybody was just like, this is confusing. Why are you sending balloons at every director? Anyway, so moving on from balloons so the third director style is the Inspirer, and this is a person who they let the team guide the project more than anything else. And I think in my experience, the third one seems to be the most exciting one to work for, but I've found that all three of them can be exciting to work for.
Yeah.
And that was the reason why I made the post, is because all three can be exciting to work for if you know how to manage the situation. And of course, I also was thinking about that from the director's side, that because I've worked as an artist, then as a director for a while, and then back as an artist. And there's something that after you've been the director, going back to just being the artist under a director, you see everything that the artist is doing with so much more compassion, and you give them a little bit more space to kind of figure things out. So I thought this would be a useful post for both directors and for people that are working under directors.
Yeah, it is very useful. I noticed that several people in the comments were like, oh, I'm this type of director. And okay. There was actually the very last comment on your post was what I was thinking was like, I think all of them are good in certain circumstances, right? Mm-hmm. And would it be better if you were an amalgamation of all three, you know? But then I could imagine that being another level of frustration where it'd be like, well, how is this guy going to direct us, or this girl, you know, whoever's directing? How is this person going to direct us? We just don't know what is going to please that person. So it probably is wiser
I've
to
seen that as well.
Yeah.
Just like frustration of just like, what are we going to get today? I have no idea.
Yeah. Which one? Yeah. So it might be wiser to fall in one of those camps. At the same time, it could be good for a director to know the other types of approaches. To say, I have a vision, you know, I do have a vision, but let's have a period of exploration and maybe communicate that to the team. Like, this is going to be a period of exploration. Then I'm going to solidify a vision, and then we are going to rally around that vision. And we, you know, you helped build it. But at the same time, you know, I think a true visionary director would already have something and would be finding things that match that and then allowing for surprises, but also then coming to the point of saying, okay, now we've got to nail these things to the wall. Because I'm sure you've been a part of productions that the style is constantly shifting through the entire production, you know? Like, we're still trying to find the characters by the end of the film. And what you end up with in animation in particular is like a character that there's several different versions of that character. And you're not really sure how to conglomerate them into one, right?
Yeah. And I've found multiple situations where I realized that the director's style was actually a reflection or a reaction to the things that were happening at the company.
Right.
Occasionally you'll get a director who is a particular style because that's just their personality.
Right.
But most of the time it's because they are getting pressure from above to deliver this type of thing. And sometimes it's really specific. Sometimes it's a lot more open, and they are reacting to forces that they don't have any control over. They're having actually the same frustration that you are, and they're trying to make their best out of kind of a difficult situation.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Very cool. Okay, so let's talk about how to work with each of these. You have a director who gives you a very clear vision, right? What he feels like a very clear vision is. and you're doing drawings and you just feel like you're not meeting the quality. Or you're thinking, why don't you just be the one to do this? Why are you having me work for you? How do you work with that kind of a director? What's the mindset shift that helped you become successful with that kind of a collaboration?
Yeah, and just as a caveat, I'm still sorting my way through all of these situations, right? It's like this is a living, breathing discovery that's happening, how to do this. But
Right.
one thing that I found that really helps being successful with the vision holder, is that the vision holder doesn't actually want the burden on their shoulders alone. They have this enormous burden to deliver something.
Yeah.
And if you will just have a conversation, if you can, I mean, sometimes you're just having, the occasional email and you don't actually get the sit down conversation. But if there's an opportunity to talk a little bit with that director and kind of get their feel for the vision of things that they're doing, you will start to understand why they're being so particular. The reason why they're being so specific with their vision is often, again, because of forces that you're just not seeing. And once you see those forces, then you become a defender of that vision with them, instead of feeling like you are a person who they are always antagonistic toward, or that they are always, I don't know, just when they do drawovers and it seems so particular, it's not so much that they really want to be that particular. It's that you don't understand the vision that they're going for. And because you don't understand, they have to direct you in a very particular way. And I have found multiple times when I have that conversation with the director and I start to really get a vision, or sometimes just working on a project for a very long time, you start to become a co-defender of that vision. And they start to like pull back on the reins a little bit and say, like, go have fun. You understand what we're doing. Go for it.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, you do want that. You do want that level of trust for sure. Yeah. And in our line of work, we work with several clients, right? And so, I mean, if it's a client, this is generally the kind of, most often, I think the kind of director you're going to be working with, in that they
Yeah.
have a vision, especially if they work in a big company, right? If it's a big company, there's already a very established vision. And so that director really is looking for, how do we deliver what, the higher ups are wanting? And so, yeah, it's asking as many questions as possible, and really building you could even create a document, I would think, where you write down all of these things in lists. And this is the stuff that I commonly hear. This is the stuff that the director is looking for. And then my goal often is to not get repeat notes, right? So if we hear a note, a few times on different pieces of work, I can make sure that when those pieces of work come back, yeah, that note is gone. We're no longer having to address that as much, right? And that becomes tricky because sometimes your eye becomes blind to things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I always tell artists, hit the notes first. If you have an alternate vision, go ahead and pitch that, but hit the notes first, because the director wants to see that you are responding to the thing that they're doing. So yeah, it's something that even a very experienced artist will not always think to themselves, I've got to hit the notes first. And so it's maybe just like a thing to post up on a little post-it note in the corner next to your computer, just like hit those notes first, and then you can move on to the thing that you want to do.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that we don't understand sometimes as creatives is narrowing that box of what you can do can actually make you more creative in a way, Because then you say, okay, I know what the box is. Now, how do I make it fresh within that box, right? And a great way to look at this is look at a group of dancers who are all doing the same dance, and yet they all do it a little bit differently, right? They are the same fixed dance steps, but each animator, each personality can bring something special to that performance.
Yeah, I like that. I think another way of thinking about it is it's a composition, right? You have boundaries
Right.
within a composition, and that doesn't mean that the picture sure, if you have a really weird aspect ratio, it may define certain things about the picture, but you can still figure out what can be done within those boundaries.
Yeah.
Even within a painting that you've already done, there might be a little corner of it where maybe it's the compositional highlight point, and there's a little bit of a area in there that is a composition within itself, because the eye is going to be searching around in that area. So
Right.
now you've got a composition. It's being defined by the things around it, but you still have decisions to make there. I think that's an important thing to understand, is that the box actually allows creation rather than it's like, yeah, maybe it restricts it in certain ways, but it's there are decisions you would never make if you didn't have that box.
Yeah. Right. And there's also, I mean, if you're a good enough artist, you also understand how to indicate a world beyond the box. If you're thinking of a composition, like an
Exactly.
environment or something like that, right? So,
Anything
I mean,
around
there's
the corner.
so much that you can still do within a box that is pretty incredible. And, you know, my favorite artists are able to do that, to work within that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Cool. So, version 2, we have somebody who's very exploratory, but they're wanting you to do all the exploration, right? So they're like, we want this thing to be, I don't even know how the briefing comes in instances like this. Like, I'm thinking something sort of like a combination of the Peanuts movie and, I don't know, Iron Giant. And they throw those two out there, right? And then it's up to you to do the exploring, and that director is constantly eliminating things and saying, well, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, it's not that, right? And often it's probably like you'd bring them a few options and it's not all of those, right? How do you work with a director like that?
Well, I think your example of the shrinking box is a good way of thinking of
Oh
that
yeah.
situation. It's the same thing as somebody else talked about a funnel, that like the at the beginning of a project you have a wide funnel, and then in order to make a thing it has to narrow down to a little point. And so the option eliminator is actually just doing their job of, we can't have this thing be everything. It's got to become one thing.
Right, yeah.
And they're making the most logical choice to just say like, okay, here's all these possibilities, is what it could be. And now it's not that, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. And we're going to narrow down this funnel a little bit. And as you move on, um, just one thing to mention about this is it's actually a very different experience if you're working with this artist alone and whether you're working with them as a team.
Hmm.
Because if you're working with a team and you're seeing the other team's options be eliminated, and when something, I don't know, there's something that they really like that some other artist does, you can tell, you're like, oh, that's where the funnel is closing to. I
Yeah.
think I can gravitate over there. When you are working in isolation, then it becomes a lot more difficult because you don't always see the stuff that is being picked. You're just seeing the nose.
Right. That is cool.
And so I think working with that situation is being patient and just understanding that your job is to create options and to not ever get discouraged by the idea that what you're doing is useless.
Yeah.
I think that's the
Yeah.
part that causes burnout, is to feel like I'm just spinning my wheels, nothing good is happening. To trust that if you're doing something that's useless, the director that is honest enough to tell you no over and over is also going to be honest enough to say, you know what, you need to shape up.
Yeah. Or you're exploring in the wrong direction. Like you keep going down this
Exactly.
vein that isn't really, it keeps getting further and further away from where I want to be. I think that's where I would spot a problem as a leader, is like, oh, this person just keeps getting further the more notes I give that person. So we really need to have a heart to heart at this point. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And then the third option, we have a director who inspires. Actually, the third one kind of seems like an amalgamation of the two in a way.
It usually, in most cases, you see directors that are doing a little bit of all of these, right? It's
Yeah.
like I think by breaking it down into directorial styles, um, it's almost like you can start to understand what strategies you need to employ to interact with the type of behavior you're seeing from the director.
Yeah.
And so the thing about the inspirer is that they have a cloud of a vision. It's not specific. They are looking for something that has never been created before. They cannot define it. They cannot draw it because they are trusting you and the team to discover what that thing is. And that's scary. It's scary as a director. It's scary as an artist to say, like, we are trying to create something that nobody has ever seen before. And we can't do it individually. Not any person on this team can do it. But maybe as a group, we can do it. Or maybe over time, a single artist can do it as you react to the things that are happening. So similar to the options eliminator, there is going to be a narrowing of that funnel over time. But the biggest difference with the Inspirer is they're very patient about how that funnel closes, and they usually have a lot more budget and time to be patient.
Mm.
A lot of like AAA games and big feature films, this is the behavior that I've seen where the director, they keep that funnel wide open for a really long time, so that, and they're very patient so that they can find the options that they can start narrowing down into. And then once it does narrow down, it narrows down very fast. So it's another expression of that funnel. It's just a different shape.
Yeah, and as you're describing, you can see why, like if you're early on the project, you're probably going to work with more of an inspirer or an option eliminator, right? But the
Yes.
further you get into project, the more that director is going to seem like the visionary and will be doing drawovers and trying to get everything to fit within that. I've been on projects that I was fascinated with how many notes I got in a certain direction, and I started to realize that the goal was to, because you could see each animator's signature on a shot. And the goal was to eliminate that even further than I've seen on any project, right? And that was fascinating. It was once I figured out what it was, rather than it dipping into my confidence and killing my confidence, it actually made it excited. It made it into a game. It made it more like, oh, if I can figure that out, then that's the game, that I'm playing here.
And
Is
I love that idea. I think that this idea of making this whole thing into a game maybe sounds a little bit mercenary, but if your mindset can be maybe compassionate as you play the game, to
yeah,
say like, oh, I'm seeing this type of behavior from this director. How can I work this system to get the best outcome out of everybody? How
yeah,
can I not just make them like my work, but actually like provide something that is valuable to them? I think that's a great way of looking at this. And I think in a similar way, a director can look at the team and the reactions that they're getting from the team, whether it's discouragement or whatever, and start to say like, okay, how is my directorial style affecting the team? And what do I need to do? How do I need to communicate with them better in order to get the best work out of them, giving and understanding what my directorial style is? Because
yeah,
if your directorial style is bad, it's just that your ability to communicate that directorial style might need a little bit of work.
yeah, absolutely. And also, I can see why in your descriptions now, why a director would be an amalgamation. Even as the project like moves on, sometimes there might be a period where it's like, I just realized as a director, there's this whole hole in this, not in the story. Like there's this whole thing that I hadn't quite figured out. And when I was looking at the entire feature film or game or whatever, it seemed like it was there. But now that we're actually working on it, I realize I don't understand this. So let's go into an exploratory phase.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, the little contractions and expansions that happen within development all the time.
Yeah. And I do love, as a director, as a leader, being able to like know where an artist is at and go to that artist and be very compassionate with the artist and say, okay, I see what's going on here. Here's how we get through this together, right? And at that point, it's no longer like artist versus director. It's like a collaboration, and you're working in some ways as equals. Each of you
Yeah,
is bringing something to the table essential to achieving a vision.
yeah. So I lived for the last 5 months. I went on a sabbatical to Quebec City,
Oh,
and I do not speak French, but
yeah.
I was trying really hard. It took a lot of mental effort and frustration to even just go to the store and get something. And it was interesting to. So I've lived a long time. I've gotten pretty good at living life. I've consider myself a pretty competent person. I can go to the gas station and pump my own gas. And then I just discovered in Quebec City that my confidence in myself and my abilities, my competence was an illusion. It's a result of me being aware of how things work in my little corner of life. And as soon as I move outside of that, then I lose any of that competence. I now need to be helped like a child would be. And I think that is an experience that an artist has over and over and over. Every project that you get onto is a new language you are learning. And I think it's very important for the director to understand that they've got a bunch of people under them that are learning this language, and the artists themselves need to understand like there is going to be a little bit of frustration as people try to discover what the language of this project is. And it's not just the terminology that's used, but just the work processes and what the style is, and the type of story being told.
Yeah. And leaders go through this as well. Every time a leader joins a new team, suddenly you start at 0. Sometimes
Yeah.
you start at -1, you know. But yeah, you can't come into it saying, I mean, you can somewhat, right? I'm the guy who directed this big film. This big game, right? You come in there, but that's only going to take you so far. Because I've heard of several, like even legendary directors who people work with, and they come out disappointed, like, oh, this guy doesn't really actually know his stuff, you know, like, he was just lucky to have the right team behind him, or, so you do have to understand that, like, when you start a project, whether you're the director or the artist, you're starting new, you're starting fresh. And you have to build those relationships from the ground up, even if you have that history behind you, right? And actually, probably especially if you do, because at that point you can start believing your own press and everybody telling you you're a great leader, and suddenly you're not focused on the things that actually made you a great leader in the first place. So, yeah, which is why your post was so great, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like these are some tools that you can have as a leader going into a project to know that this is how the artists are going to feel. And if you can get your artists to see how to work with you, that could make the process happen even faster. Then the onus isn't on just them, you know?
Yeah, I think it was Glenn Keane that said that making a film is like jumping out of an airplane, and you're creating the parachute as you fall.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think like that's something that both the director and the team experiences. Sometimes experienced directors will get better at constructing the parachute, and it's something different every single time. But it's just like it's always the same problem. There's no escaping that. Even a director that is very used to working in the same style, now moving into a new project, they have new forces working on them. The market that they're trying to reach is different. The problems of that particular story are different, and it
Hmm.
is just the exact same problem. It's unavoidable.
Yeah. We should be used to starting over and over again. If you really want to grow to your full potential, like going to Quebec City, that's an amazing thing that you were able to do. And suddenly, you know, you probably, again, I keep coming back to this idea that confidence is just knowing what you're up against, like what you have to solve. At that point, if you can clearly see that, then suddenly you have the confidence that you need.
Yeah, and I think it's important not to, if you're thinking about like how do you define yourself, and how do you think of yourself? Where does that confidence base come from? It's not because of the problems that you've solved in the past.
Yeah.
It's because you have learned how to be a problem solver.
Right.
And the person who is confident is often just a person they've solved enough problems now that they are kind of excited to jump into a new one.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm actually quite fascinated by a question that just popped in my mind. We might explore it, or yeah. Um, it is that you work with a lot of professionals and a lot of students. What are some insights that you gain from that in light of what we've been chatting about?
Yeah, so I've noticed that students tend to be a little bit more, I don't know if the term is fragile, but their morale and their ability to create work in a very difficult situation is a lot narrower than a professional. And so I think my advice to any students would be very resilient. Try to, express some of this patience we've been talking about as people try to figure out the process, and don't be so freaked out about your place in the world. I think every artist has some degree of I can't remember, imposter syndrome.
Ah, yes.
They say like, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. Like just, I have talked with some of the most inspiring, incredible artists. And then you say like, do you feel like you belong here? Like, no, I, I have no idea how this happened. And I feel like any day somebody's going to discover and kick me out of here. And it's just like that is such a common feeling. You're all feeling it. Just it's okay to feel that way. I haven't yet myself figured out how to get rid of imposter syndrome. It's just I've kind of gotten used to it as just being the background noise of my life.
Yeah.
Um, and then with professionals, especially like the people that I've worked with that are very experienced, is they are incredibly resilient and able to react to feedback, react to changing situations. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've noticed is just that if you want to kind of move into that professional sphere, even if you are a professional, but you feel like you've got imposter syndrome, act like you belong a little bit.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. I like that you said it's the background noise of your
Yeah.
life. It's
Can't
just,
escape it. You're always feeling bad about the work you do, and like, somebody's gonna just decide that you don't belong anymore.
yeah. And it does seem like lately AI has magnified that too
Yeah.
for many
Yeah,
people.
there's a lot of insecurity surrounding AI, which I think some of it is something we should be reacting to. You should be trying to sharpen your skills and get more, especially try to get good at the things that AI isn't as good at doing because like the market is changing.
Yeah.
But also a lot of it is just it's a distortion of reality. It's like there's so many things that AI is not good at, and
Mhm.
if if you follow projections, it kind of seems like it's never going to be good at. And
Yeah.
so, maybe there will be some future technology that will be good at it, but Gen AI, as we understand it and see it, will never be good at certain things.
Yeah.
And becoming familiar with that and being able to react to it will give you that confidence back instead of just feeling all the time like robots taking my job. Ugh,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and
that
I
pit in
actually
your stomach that
saw,
never goes away.
I wish I remember what the name of the YouTube channel was, but this was an artist who instructs students online through YouTube and various other things. And he was saying, AI has actually increased our workload because people go in thinking, "Oh, I can do this fast." They put it together and then they're like, "Oh, this is not working." And so he comes in, he can fix all of that stuff and build it properly, and wins the even more devotion of the client in that way by showing them that, yeah, it wasn't even a good starting point, where
Yeah.
I think with a student, it might be tempting to look at that, be impressed immediately. I actually have a Pinterest board of AI that, if I'm impressed immediately by it, I put it on that board and then I come back and look at it.
Mhm.
And it's called AI I Might Like, is what the name of the board is. Because I inevitably come back to it. I'm like, oh, ugh, like
I-
suddenly whereas if you look at a master painter, you might have the opposite impression.
yeah.
You might see the painting for the first time and be like, "Oh, okay," but then you see it again, you're like, "Wow!" And your admiration for it deepens, right?
Yeah, and actually, that segues into a topic that I think is so important related to art direction, which is that managing the morale of the team and getting everybody to be inspired about the vision. That's something that all three of these director types are trying to do.
Yeah,
Um, I have found with students and in the professional experiences that I've had that using AI as part of the art direction, specifically like vision boards that include AI, um, which is interesting because there is often other art in there, right? When I say vision boards, I mean like reference boards and things like that that get you excited about what's going on. Um, they seem like the AI is going to help you kind of like leapfrog up to a higher level. It's just like, the AI is the base minimum level now. We'll only get better from there. And the artists have always produced worse work. It's like we aren't even that far into the kind of AI era, but I've already seen it happen on like 5 or 6 different teams,
it poisons
and
the well in a way. Yeah.
it poisons the well. It's just
Mhm.
like the AI. I think here's the trick with it is that when you're looking for reference, you'll often find some great master painting that's really inspiring, but it's only like 30% of what you want. And then you'll find this really cool image and you say, oh, that's only like 50% of what I want. But then you find an AI image and you're like, ooh, that's like 80% of what I want. And it becomes
Oh,
really exciting because it's like, oh, I can actually like type in a prompt and get something that's 80% of what I want, which is actually not really that common. It's more sometimes you stumble across something that's 80% of what you want.
yeah.
I usually get only 60% when I type in a prompt.
Mhm.
Um, but closing that gap is actually very difficult for the team between that 80% that the AI gave you to the 100%. Whereas allowing the team to take the image that's 30% and 50% and extrapolate a little bit and kind of fill in the space in between, you just get better results from the team. And
Awesome.
I know some of that might be dealing with the fragility of students that might be biasing the results of what I've seen. But the fact that I've seen a trend in it makes me think I'm not going to, at least I'm going to be very selective about when I include AI in a board that is supposed to inspire people.
Yeah. Well, and it's also the things I see people creating with it are usually derivative of something, right? Which is what you. That was before the recording started, but started talking about IPs, right? And how
Yeah.
the things that Hollywood are releasing are just repeats of something they've already done, and that's what I see a lot with AI, and that's what AI is actually. It's scraped a bunch of data and it's spitting out something that it saw and it scrambles it, but yeah, it's still spitting that stuff out.
There's a design principle you might be familiar with called convergence,
Uh-huh.
which is this idea that when conditions are stable, and this is true across many different things, not just market conditions, evolution works this way. But when conditions are stable, all the designs gravitate towards a certain very predictable set of things. But then when conditions get very unstable, then things scatter and you start getting a whole bunch of different options. And you might have seen this with, it's like every car is like a SUV shaped kind of white blob. And that's what it's been for the last 5 years or something like that. And, what
Fonts.
happened with interesting cars, right?
Yeah.
I think when you think about this idea of AI is the ultimate convergence. It will take all the stuff that has been done and converge towards these very predictable solutions. And there may be times when that is desirable. There will be times when the market in general is going to be saying, what we need is the tried and true. But there's going to be times when things are falling apart, and I predict that the times when things fall apart is going to we're just around the corner from that. I mean,
Right.
I think like there's a lot of fear in Hollywood right now. There's a lot of fear in the games industry right now, and a lot of it is kind of this fear of new ideas, fear of taking risks, and when the dam of that fear breaks, and the fallout that comes from that, I'm hoping it will be a positive fallout, right? That everybody will hit a point where they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Let's make something awesome, and they'll start to take some risks again. It's like at that point, AI will be completely unfit for the job.
Yes. Well, the other thing is, so as I'd mentioned, I'm trying to raise money for movies. I have 15 feature film pitches up on my website and more coming, right? And there's one project in particular that has an executive producer who went out and was talking to different investors, and everybody was like, "We want something to be AI. We want it to include AI, right?" And I have ideas surrounding that, and I'm glad we had this discussion because it's sharpened the ideas for sure. But my it came out of my mouth, and it seemed wise as I have been reflecting on it. I said, "Well, just keep in touch with those investors. In 6 months, we'll probably be able to convince them."
I,
Just and I could be wrong, right? I'm human, but it did seem very accurate that to build an entire business on something that can go both ways is not a wise business strategy. You don't build your business on something that's squirrely and can just go in different directions, or like a balloon that goes all over the room, right? You build your business on something solid, and then you do have components of your business that are experimental, and you can bring things in like a balloon going all over the place to see how it can enhance things. But you also have to be willing, like you said, to watch the patterns and say, hey, when we include AI on these vision boards, it's actually making things worse, and then you pull it out. And then you see maybe there's a better place for a tool like that. I used Grammarly, which now advertises itself as an AI tool when I was doing my books on Kickstarter. And I found that it was not as good as I thought it was. When I brought real humans to come in and read the book, all the promises that Grammarly made of all the grammar mistakes and everything being gone, they weren't. We had to do just as much editing as before, right? So, yeah, it's a matter of being wise and seeing what's worked for ages, and also playing with the technology. There's no harm in playing with it.
yeah.
But yeah.
I think this dovetails into the previous conversation, which is that the art directors, the creative directors that you're working with, that's the forces they're dealing with. It's
Yeah.
investors that are saying this, producers that are saying this, people that sometimes know a lot about the business and sometimes don't know very much, and you are trying to play to two crowds. You have the artist that you're trying to like get to make this crowd happy, and then this crowd is, that they're going to like run your team into the ground if you just let them have complete control. And so you're also trying to get the artists to do the most with what they have, or the game designers, or whatever it is, depending on which design group you're working with. Story is a big one. That's just, I think, managing the story team and the executive team is really difficult, because story artists are putting their whole heart and soul out there every single pass, and you're crushing it over and over again.
Yeah, that is true. Well, cool. So I usually have writers and directors and producers on this show. And then every once in a while I get an artist. So, or somebody who works in the pipeline, like through lighting or rigging or that sort of thing. So I would love to hear this question answered from your perspective. So I often ask people the get wiser moment, which is, if my goal is to get the highest clarity, potency of meaning into a film, what approach would you recommend? Now, generally, those come from a story perspective about focusing on character, or being honest, or living life, or, the answers have been various and they've been great. I would like to know from an art direction perspective. Like, I want the images to convey meaning. What approach would you recommend?
Well, I think everything comes back to the stories being told. Even
Mm-hmm.
if you're working on a video game or an advertisement, a little like 30-second spot, it's just like, what is the story you're telling people? Every decision should be shaped around that story. And not just, I think this is where people sometimes get confused when doing art direction, and the artists working under art directors, is they think that just because something is reflective of the story as a whole, that they're doing their job. But really understanding what in that moment, so this is 10 minutes into the film, 10 seconds into the spot, how do I want people to feel at this moment? And then using contrasts to amplify the way that you want people to feel. I think that's I think Ian McCaig said contrast is the secret to everything. And as I've been studying that over the last 10 years, I've come to believe it so firmly. It's just like, if you want your thing to have impact, if you want the film, the game, whatever, to actually be something people are talking about 10 minutes later, and not just be something that they were just like, oh, that was kind of a fun experience. And by the way, that it doesn't have to be something super meaningful, right? You can have a gag be something people are talking about 10 years later because it resonated with them on this core level. For the Birds is a great example of this. That's a short by Pixar where you have the little birds that come in, and then the big bird that's awkward.
Yeah,
And
he's contrasting.
yeah, and it's just
Yeah.
like both the story and the visuals are so good at creating a little bit of affinity or sameness between these birds, and also saying this other bird has some qualities that suggest it should be with these other birds, but it's also different, and they're not letting it join them. And even though it's just kind of this gag short, it's just like you watch it again and it's like, man, that is good. It really resonates. It feels like it's kind of speaking to like these universal truths that will never go away. And I think that's something that it's all the parts that add up to that. And I think the art direction and the artists, they understood what their job was. They understood how their piece of the puzzle fit into the whole.
Yeah, that's awesome. You actually got me thinking, because even within a broader project, like Spirited Away, is a very serious project, right? It's a very serious film. And yet the part I think about all the time is the gag. It's a funny moment. And it was done through contrast, where you have Chihiro going down the stairs and she is just like inching down those stairs, right? And then a stair breaks and she screams all the way down the stairs. And I can't get enough of that moment, because it was so deeply ingrained in her character. Like, you knew she wanted to scream, but she knew that if she screamed, she would be caught, through most of the experience. So she's just like moving further inward until she's so frozen she can nearly not move. And then there's just this release valve that just, oh yeah, it's so brilliant. And
it's like, who has not been going up or down the stairs in the dark and then had that like sudden bout of fear and like run the rest down the stairs? It's
yeah.
like such a human response, and it's irrational, but it connects with it's like that contrast is what makes it just be like, yeah, that makes no sense, but it's so right at the same time.
Yeah. I love that. That is a moment too that I say would have a great potency of meaning. Like I just keep thinking about it, and my brain keeps coming back to it and wants to think about it multiple times throughout my life, which is quite remarkable, right? That you can achieve something like that through storytelling. So, well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we end?
No, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a great conversation.
Yep. And check out Sam's work in the description of this video. You can see it's just samneelsen.com, right? Your website?
Yeah.
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 So yeah, check his work out, engage with what he's working on. And until next time, I hope we all get a little wiser. Hosted by Scott Weiser. Audio version edited by Kira Horowitz. Copyright Scott Weiser LLC 2024. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell.